Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks! What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the new Artisan Cutlery and Ferrum Forge Trux. A lot of you guys were asking, hey, are you going to check this out? Yes. Thank you so much to Artisan Cutlery for sending this in for me to take a look at. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me. And please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. So this is available. I'll link it right down below. You guys can check it out if you want. It does help my channel when you use those links, but that's entirely up to you. This is the second, apparently, Artisan Cutlery and Ferrum Forge collab. And you can look at this. If you're even vaguely familiar with Ferrum Forge, you can spot their designs from a mile away. And that's not a bad thing. I think it's actually a good thing, right? I mean, it's this brand recognition, I guess. But yeah, it's very Ferrum Forgey, and to my delight, it is on the larger side, which I think works a lot better with their, how they like to shape the flipper tab and the fact that they like to do, you know, usually a choil right here. I just think it works better. So I'll share my thoughts with you guys. Let's go ahead and get some specs real quick. Overall length of the Trux coming in at 8 1/4 inches, blade length 3.65 inches, cutting edge 3 1/4. How about some size comparisons? Any custom scales you see in this section can be found down in the description under Original Goat and others. So up against the 8010 and the 8020.5, you can see here it's approaching the size and blade height of the 8010. It's just nowhere near as thick or robust. Much larger than the 8020.5. How about up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3? Again, much closer to the size of the PM2, quite a bit longer than the Para 3, way more cutting edge, even with that forward choil, way more cutting edge than the PM2. And then last but not least, let's put it up against the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue and the Hogue Deca. Alrighty, so how's the action on this guy? It's pretty good. It's got the typical Ferrum Forge pivot quality. The flipper tab does allow for a good flip as long as you're not on the lock bar. The detent could be slightly heavier. I think this is a lot of blade. It's got kind of a kerplunk detent, but it's snappy and it doesn't move, right? I just feel like for the size of blade, I just wish that the detent was slightly heavier so that I could. This is the type of flipper tab I like to push button. It is literally a Hinder XM18 flipper tab that's been flipped upside down, which actually works better especially if you're trying to push button it, right? And actually, no, if you're trying to push button it, and especially if you're trying to light switch it, because you're not flipping on the hook, right? So that's good. But the blade is so big, I really feel like it could have done with a little bit heavier detent for flipping it. Now, if you're going to reverse flick it using the fuller, then you'll be happy that the detent is the strength that it is. So it really just depends on how you like to deploy it. Can you deploy it with like a thumb flick? It's not really big enough or deep enough to do that. But reverse flicking it is just fine, and the fuller is long enough that you can do that. There is no double clutch thanks to the positioning of the flipper tab and detent ball. However, there is no lock bar insert cutout. It's very narrow. It's not a thick knife, and there's just slight cutouts on either side. So I really wish that this was cut a little lower, or this side was cut a little higher, or they did the Brian the Doe, where they use the lock bar insert to lip out. That's a genius way of doing that. I think more companies should do that. I don't know if Brian was the first one to do that, but that's one I noticed, right? So it makes disengagement of the lock bar a bit pinchy. Not a deal breaker, something you will notice. Let's go ahead and do carry profile. So thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. It's a thin boy. Look at this. It's thin, right? For the size it is. Length and the height up against the PM2 and Para 3. Honestly, for as big a knife as it is, fairly compact. I mean, it's approaching the maximum height of that hump on the PM2 and Para 3, but it's actually shorter than the PM2. Materials. What are we looking at here? Titanium. Some nice, I mean, it's plain, right? Very Ferrum Forgey, but it's titanium. And we have S35V. And I'm kind of surprised that they didn't do S90V with, you know, all the S90V knives they've been doing. But that's preference. It's not like one steel is like universally better. I mean, when we're talking about crucible powder formed stainless steels, It's not like S90V is universally better than S35VN. There are plenty of people who will choose S35VN over S90V for certain things. S35VN, for example, is definitely tougher and is definitely easier to maintain while still being, I think, just as stainless. It really only falls short in performance in terms of edge retention versus S90V, but S35VN will still definitely hold a great edge. A very good steel for sure, and certainly appropriate for the price point. So let's go ahead and take a look at the inside. I believe there's, nope, I'm wrong. There's no, I forget, Artisan Cutlery just does not like to mill things out for weight reduction. Okay, that's fine. The weight on this guy comes in at, surprisingly, almost 5 ounces. I really thought it wouldn't be that heavy, but this isn't, I'm not gonna call this heavy, right? You have 5 ounces of knife for 3.65 inches of blade. So not perfect ratios, but that only matters to some people. And honestly, the balance is right behind the pivot, probably thanks to the enormous amount of blade that you get. So really, it just doesn't feel all that heavy. Let's go ahead and do a hardware check. I'm going to get out my tools. As per usual, my tools are, excuse me, very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them right down in the section of my description that talks about the tools I use on this channel, or the pinned comment. So we're going to start with a T8. Now let's take a look here. Artisan, what do we got back here? Still T6. Some of their knives have transitioned to T8, but not everything. Let's do everything. I mean, that's a request. It's not a command, right? But I feel like most people would prefer T8. So it's not a deal breaker. This is still a very simple and common construction for a knife, which is what you want. You don't want overly complicated, disassembly. So just a couple of T6 screws on each side and then 2 screws for the clip. There is no mounting position for left-handed people. Sorry, lefties. You'll have to carry this in your right-hand pocket, which I'm sure most lefties are just used to having to do if they find a right-handed only knife that they really, really want. As long as you have the right tools for the job, you should be good to go. Let's go ahead and measure blade stock thickness real quick. Blade stock thickness on this knife coming in. I'm going to guess that's 115. No, it's not. It's not quite that thin. 122 thousandths, what I'm seeing here. Okay, let's get into the meat and potatoes. Why did you say that Ferrum Forge designs work better with a larger profile? In my experience, not all Ferrum Forge knives are the same, but when they do this is like very within formula for Ferrum Forge. And what they like to do is this classic handle profile. This is very knife profile, right? Unmistakably a knife handle. They do this specific reverse XM18 flipper tab and then a forward choil. When it's compacted, a good example would be CJRB's collaboration with Ferrum Forge. I can't remember what that thing's called. It crams you in, and it's like, I'm not sure, like if your hands are my size, you're like, I'm not sure if I have enough room here. What I'm going to do is move up here, right? And on that knife, the whole thing is so small that you feel crammed in either position because the choil is not roomy enough in coordination with the shape of flipper tab, which is also supposed to be the guard, right? Now, obviously, this can happen with this knife if your hands are really, really big. But most people are going to have hands that are either similar to mine, slightly larger, slightly smaller. That's right there where people are going to be. So when you do the Ferrum Forge handle profile, it's going to work out better for more people, in my opinion. It's just my opinion. When we do a larger knife, right? Looking back to some of the Wii collaborations, their other collab with Artisan Cutlery, and a number of other knives that they've just done themselves and used whoever for the OEM. That's been the case. So yeah, that's just my thoughts. And this does work. I mean, the handle, while it's thin, I don't think it's actually, no, I think I'm wrong. I think it actually is like subtly contoured. If it's not, man, they did a good job of masking like where the edges start. But it's nicely rounded and it's really nice and clean to look at. I do wish that we had some texturing somewhere, something to break up the very plain look. It's cool. It looks good, right? And if you love a smooth handle, then you'll really like this. And honestly, there's enough lock-in on the knife that I don't feel, ergonomically like I'm going to drop the thing or it's going to slip out of my hand during disengagement or deployment. I think I just personally like texturing, and I feel like it adds utility and doesn't really take away from anything except for aesthetic preference. So that is a preference, though. So I suppose you can think whatever you want. I just feel like this would have been much more interesting if they'd done unique texturing. And I know Artisan Cutlery and CJRB are plenty capable of that. They've demonstrated that on a number of models. They can do some really interesting micro texturing. So it would have been nice to see that, but that's okay. There's really nothing else going on here with the handle, and there's no lanyard hole, which is great. And honestly, that I think looks a lot cleaner. So I don't really have a problem with that. Very, very Ferrum Forge blade. Tumbled. We have a fuller. It goes through a flat. We have a swedge, right? Just big, wide, or tall drop point blade. Has Artisan Cutlery right here. On the other side, we have the Ferrum Forge logo, and then for some reason a code and S35VN. But it's not like being showcased. It's not out here where Microtech likes to put it, right? So it looks good. The jimping complements the index finger choke up position perfectly. And the blade does come down to a reasonably thin edge. It's not like, it's not insano thin. But as far as slicing goes, it's going to be fine. This is actually held up pretty well, just in and out of the pocket over the last few days. I've had a pretty good experience carrying this. And the edge is not fatigued. They advertised Rockwell hardness for their S35VN to be 59 to 61, which is fine. S35VN, much like M390, can go up slightly higher, but it is not bad at all in this territory. So I personally don't have a problem with it. The cutting apex is even all the way down to the tip, and it looks good on both sides. Just a really good overall utilitarian blade shape. Edges on the spine are knocked down just a bit out of the tip. Nope, not even out of the tip. It doesn't get really all that sharp. Fullers can be a slight gunk trap, but the remedy I've found is wiping them out with a paper towel. Nobody really complains about it anymore. I just thought there was a time period where I thought it was so funny. There was like people jumped on this bandwagon where they're like, I can't do a fuller. It's a real gunk trap. It really gunks up the blade. I'm like, are paper towels just like not a thing? Like, it's such a silly. If you have like an incredibly thick blade and the fuller is super deep, right? And you're cutting, let's say you're cutting sawdust infused mashed potatoes and sand. Then that would be kind of a problem, but that's not what people are cutting. I just feel like that's a problem that doesn't really exist if people are blowing out of proportion. Then again, I do stuff like that too, right? Case in point, I invented plunge drag to complain about on this channel. So, all right, fine. Yeah, the fuller's not really a problem. The blade is thin enough and the fuller is shallow enough that, every now and then stuff will get in there and you just wipe it out. No big deal. I'm happy that it's there. I will use it much more often as a convenient means of deployment than I will be frustrated with it as a place where light debris decides to congregate. It's way too many syllables to say that. But yeah, okay. Moving on. There's really not a lot going on here. We have a simple backspacer, Artisan Cutlery back here, which they don't need to do because we've already got the Artisan Cutlery logo on the blade. We have a very simple pocket clip. It is short, though. I do like this. This is a nice move. What I don't like is the up and over instead of curved upward. That's what I like. Up and over makes it a little pinchy, but truthfully not bad. And we have a smooth surface for the pocket clip to ride on. So in and out of the pocket really was not a bad experience at all. And ergonomically, even back here, not a big deal. The pocket clip is so thin and the edges are knocked down. It's rounded. The clip itself is contoured. It's a shorter clip falling in well under the 50% mark of the handle, which that's a preference for me. I don't like long clips. If you like long clips, that's fine. I don't like long clips. I think that's silly. This is fine. The retention on it is good enough, right? Carry depth, you're going to be about right here. So there's a little bit of a free willy coming up out of your pocket there. But make sure and add context if you're going to explain that to somebody else. Yeah, carry depth's about medium. That's fine. Honestly, retention's good enough. The clip is just fine. There is a steel lock bar insert that doubles as the over travel stop. Lockup, we have a stop pin that is internal and attached to the blade. So we have a pin that will contact this side of the scale and a pin that will contact this side of the scale, which is great. Adds for some nice lockup solidity while maintaining good action. There is absolutely no blade play up, down, left, or right. There is no lock stick. There is no double clutch, no pivot lash. Very smooth and consistent action in here. Kind of a thuddy detent, right? And we do have perfect centering with absolutely no detent lash. This is a cool knife. It, in a lot of ways, is interesting, but then as time progresses, will be fairly indistinguishable amidst the sea of other Ferrum Forge designs out there. Personally, there's nothing extremely memorable about this knife. Like, if you just like Ferrum Forge designs and you've been waiting for like the next big, well, on the larger side, Ferrum Forge collab titanium frame lock, right? This is it right now. I mean, this is this is about as classic Ferrum Forge as it gets, right? But as time progresses, there's not really a lot distinguishing this from other designs, right? So it's just going to come down to personal preference. Like, for me, it's cool, it's fine, and honestly, at $199, I don't think it's a bad value at all. It doesn't absolutely wow me. I wish it was personally, wish it was S90V, because I really like S90V at this price. But I think it's not necessarily that I personally prefer S90V over S35VN in all scenarios. It's just that Artisan Cutlery has done such a great job of bringing value to the table, and it's really impressive. While they're not that far apart in price, like when these companies buy S90V or S35VN from Crucible, they're not that far apart in terms of price. S90V is definitely more expensive, which is why it was so, unlikely that we'd ever see it on a knife under $200 up until now, right? The cost of it must have gone down or something. I'm not really sure, but you get such an amazing level of edge retention for the rest of the balance of the steel, so you get that feeling of value. And with a thinner geometry, I mean, this is I would say fairly thin geometry. For a lot of people, I think, that are actually looking at knives like this, I feel like they really feel like they get that value at S90V. But S35VN is fine. Personally, I would have enjoyed this a lot more. I think at S90V and some unique texturing and some other unique element to sort of stamp this as like a more important Ferrum Forge design. I think I'm being unfairly critical here, honestly, like listening to myself talk about this. And I think that I've just become I want this. I want more, This is good. If you like this, I think this is a good knife. And honestly, this is a recommendable knife, right? I'm just not, as a design reviewer, I kind of look, and I'm not trying to reduce this to it's not going to wow me unless it's S90V and unless it's textured, but the design, it doesn't really have much more personality other than just being a Ferrum Forge, right? So it's all right. I think that anybody who picks this up is going to be really happy with it. And I think, once again, Artisan Cutlery has done a great job collaborating with and executing a design, collaborating with Ferrum Forge and executing one of their designs. I think this is just fine. But I think the major thing here is lock bar access cutout. That really needed to be here, and it isn't. So that's it. Ferrum Forge Trux, generally speaking, recommendable knife. Fine value at $199. That's going to be it today, guys. Like I said, this knife will be linked down in the description. You can check it out if you want to. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.